Hello, hello, everyone. Hopefully, you are having a good week. We are almost at the end. It's almost time for weekend, but I decided that we needed another positive talk this week so we can add some more positivity into the world, into the algorithm. And we will be having a conversation today about a book him on today to discuss the book. Hopefully, you all pick up a copy and read it yourself. We'll try our best not to give any spoilers. Hello, hello. Oh, I can't hear you. Yes,
My
kind
first live on so thank you for your patience.
of. Yeah, that's the fun part about technology and doing stuff live is sometimes you gotta work through it
That's
live.
right. Pleasure to meet you virtually. I know we've had conversations back and forth, written to each other, but it's nice to talk to you face to face.
Yeah, I am very appreciative that you came on here to have a conversation because I had seen your books a couple months ago when I was just scrolling online and the fox definitely caught my attention. I was like, what is that? And then I was just like waiting and waiting for it to come out and it finally got here and I was like, you know what? I'm going to reach out to him and see if he'd have a conversation with me about the book because I absolutely loved it.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I'm flattered and I'm honored to be speaking with you. I'm so glad that you reached out. I think I told you when we were chatting, I didn't have an idea of kind of the work that you did until investigated your profile and your positive talk series. And as I shared with you, it's something that is very close to my heart and some of the work that I have asked. And so this is a mutual respect, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity to talk with each other.
Yeah, I feel like conversations like the one we've had around like DEI and stuff like that are the utmost importance to be talking about in today's climate. But I want to first let you introduce yourself so people know who you are, and then we can kind of dive into a conversation around all these different things as well as talk a little bit about the book.
Yeah, yeah, happy to do that. Well, my real name is Alex Minette. I go by the pseudonym S.W. Ken, which currently I just finished my debut novel, The Storyteller from Valencia. It is a young adult fantasy novel, first time author. But prior to this, I spent about 20 years in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everything from a coach to a trainer to a project manager. In my most recent role, I was an executive globally in that space. So something that's very near and dear to my heart and something I'm sure we'll get into in regards to how it translates even into my writing in the book itself. So
Yeah, that's where I wanted to start was like how much of like your real life inspired certain things that you put in the book because I definitely admire when characters can be put into books that represent me and how I kind of navigate life. You can definitely tell that you are aware of the feelings and stuff that come up with LGBT relationships. I love that you didn't like make it a different type of thing. It wasn't like this relationship was like how here in the United States a lot of parents might react to an LGBT relationship. I was telling my partner it reminded me a lot of like Schitt's Creek and how LGBT relationship was just another relationship in the storyline. It wasn't this like big focus of what are you doing? It was just allowed to exist in the storyline as a love story that you got to just exist and feel. And I really enjoyed that part of the book.
I'm glad, and I'll go back and answer your question in a second, but I want to touch base on that. First and foremost, that was really intentional for me. I think that there are so many stories, and important stories, by the way, that have already been done around queer trauma. I grew up in the 80s in the height of the AIDS epidemic. And so those were a lot of the initial stories that I was exposed to. And even those were few and far between during that time, don't get me wrong. But for a long time, we told our stories that are still important stories, but stories of the difficulties of coming out, stories that we have been disowned, stories of loss, and stories of just, being isolated kind of from society. And I think it's really critical, especially today, as you and I were talking, where we are living in an environment where, once again, our community and several other marginalized communities are being made to feel invisible and trying to kind of push us back into the closet. And I wanted to represent in this book queer joy. I wanted to represent Black joy. I wanted to represent, characters and storylines where they didn't live in a world. And that's the beautiful thing about fantasy, is I can create any world that I. They didn't have to live in a world where homophobia existed, where racism existed, where that just was not a thing. And, some people may argue, well, that's just not interesting story. There is plenty of human vices for us to get into, both individually, community wise, politically, that you can play with without having to dip into those traumas. And I know personally for me too, and we can talk a little bit more about this kind of later, but I also wanted the surrounding characters of these characters. For so many gay young men growing up, a lot of us, especially from my generation, did not have healthy adult figures in our life surrounding, our interaction and relationship, particularly father figures. And so I really wanted to create characters in this book that not just, the world itself was kind of, ambivalence the wrong word, but, just it was not a thing. But I wanted to create those that were immediately in their family to be supportive, to be healthy, to be, I'm so happy that you're in love kind of thing. So, answer your question. I think every author will tell you, and I think it's been said before, I won't be the first one to say it, but writing a book is some of the best therapy. And whether it is subconsciously or consciously, so much of yourself goes into that book and some of the characters. And in fact, today, I've talked with others after I finished the book. There are things that I was not intentional about putting in that really are metaphors for pieces of my life, but it came out through the writing. And in hindsight, as I go back and read it, I'm like, wow, that represented this experience in my life, and it was not intentional. And then there are intentional moments that I really wanted to address, like I said, around kind of the experience of being queer. Our main character, Burke, there's a lot of me in him, some of his insecurities, especially around other men, like a little bit of an outsider, some of the way that he has his internal narrative and dialogue. There's a lot of me inside him. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting to kind of connect to the different characters and how they navigate the world around them, because one of the things that you added in there that I really connected to was just like the struggle of new people coming into your life and kind of adjusting to, I have feelings for this person, but now like this new person's coming in and they're uh different. I had this opinion of them because maybe they rubbed me the wrong way with this comment. And then you play it out so well where I was just sitting there reading. I was like, this is how it does feel in real life. Whereas I've read books in the past where I'm like, that's a little unrealistic. Like, that's not how feelings happen. But introducing new characters and kind of having them explore, like, okay, like, what is our relationship? We didn't start off on a good foot, but we've got a better relationship now. And then we've had shifts where you learn information about someone that you didn't before. How does that now create a new relationship between you and that character? And you did it so well with so many different characters. And the whole time I was just like, okay, that makes sense from the beginning now. And I love just the character development and the relationships with everybody that you keep connecting the dots with.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think I would have been able to write the book that I did today 20 years ago, much less from the diversity factor, but because of the work that I did in diversity, equity, and inclusion, it really shaped me on how to tell a story and really understanding the narrative of so many individuals, so many communities. And one of the biggest things I think that I learned from that overall experience was that, there is so much gray in all of our lives. And not the character gray, but like the color.
Yeah.
Two things can be true at once. I think that was my mantra just kind of going into this, that nobody is one black and one white, whether it's in regards to our ethics, our values, our belief system. And so that balance, even within ourselves, I really kind of wanted to play with. Um, in regards to kind of, the other thing that I was really trying to capture in regards to your comments, with the queer community especially, I feel like, and again, I'll speak to my generation, kind of Gen X, growing up in the 80s, most of us were not exposed until we were adults to even our first relationships, And so we were, I don't want to say stunted, but we were behind in being able to navigate what relationships look like. And so what a lot of, young adults are able to experience in high school and explore with dating, with flirting, with your first fights, with your first, sexual innuendos, all of that, we didn't get to experience until maybe our early 20s. And I think that's reflected in a lot of, queer and gay culture. And so what you see in this book is that there is an insta attraction, right, between Burke and Gray. And there's other reasons beyond that of why, of kind of based on what they're going through, that may feel weird to, people that grew up straight and were able to kind of experience that younger. But we know in queer culture, it doesn't matter if it's the gay community or the lesbian community, we tend to move a little bit faster with our emotions because we don't have the same dating pool. We don't have the same, kind of experiences growing up. And so when you recognize somebody that has a background like you, an experience like you, it does connect you on a deeper level. Likewise, to your point, we also are, a very emotive and I think an emotionally intelligent community. And because we spend so much time in our youth being an outsider and knowing what discrimination looks like, we pick that up even within our community when somebody is being fake with us, when somebody is, trying to isolate us. And so we do have strong initial reactions. And it takes us some time to see the whole holistic picture. And so I think it captures some of the queer experience, and some of the relationships that I were trying to build in there.
Yeah, I I was looking because I'm a part of several different like book spaces online, and I noticed that there were a lot of queer books that had gay relationships in them where maybe because there's a lot of women that read books with queer stories in them as well, but I was reading through like the comments and I was like, you don't get it. Like you don't understand the relationship because like I'd read the book and I'm like, wow, it captured that. Like it captured what I'm feeling. I can definitely tell when a gay relationship is written by a straight woman who is writing it in a way that is felt through the straight community. And I'm like, it, maybe one day that would be how it is, but that's not how feelings feel. And you described it perfectly. I think that that is something, even if you're not aware, you can almost sense it in just the little pieces that are added into the conversation and the description of feelings that happen that LGBT people growing up understood that in a way that other people who didn't experience those feelings would never understand that. And another beautiful piece you kind of touched on it was you said the word balance. And as soon as you started sharing all the characters who kind of represented the balance of the world and then how it kind of fell off balance, I was like, oh, he could go forever with this. Like he could write so many books and I would read every single one of them because I love the idea of having the balance. Of course, the two you're introduced to very early on is chaos, and I was just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And the way you described chaos is not the bad thing. I've had so many conversations with my straight male counterparts where they talk about order being such an important thing. And as a gay person, I found that because order said that who I am is not right, that I've felt more comfortable stepping into chaos and creating my own order out of it. And when you kind of brought those two characters that represented chaos and order, I was just like, ooh, yes, this is another thing pulling me in because that's a conversation and a thought that I've had a lot of. And of course, in today's world, we're seeing a lot of chaos. And I've told people, it's like something I look at that I thought was beautiful about the pandemic, though it was a horrible thing, was there was a lot of LGBT spaces that were dark clubs just because that's where we had to exist before. Now things are starting to open up and new businesses are existing. I was like, let's step out into the light. And with the government, there's a lot of things going wrong and being shut down and people are being let go. But I'm hoping that in this chaos, that new order that will be better representative of the whole community and all the diverse people that exist in the country. I know that there's a lot of like people freaking out about it, but I try to keep my mind in the space of although things may be chaotic, it does give us a chance to say George Washington did this. There's no way that he could have understood the world we live in today, and we're still trying to live in this order. It's time to kind of create new, better things from the chaos that kind of shook things out because we were trying so hard to kind of fix things slowly, but it wasn't fast enough for how quickly we were growing. The internet grew way too fast for any of the current structure to hold it. And I think that the chaos that's happening now, which I think is beautifully written into your story as well, like chaos isn't always horrible. It isn't always bad.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, there was a quote very early on in the book where Pan, our chaos witch, who is the aunt of Burke, she's talking to him as a child and she's teaching him to kind of embrace the storm because after the storm is when we see new growth. And, you know, we can look at just even nature, right? Like when there is a wildfire, it is tragic. No doubt there is loss of, you know, lives, there is loss of land. It's something to be grieved, but then it scorches the land so that new life can grow up, and often it is stronger life, right, that replenishes it from it. And it's the same thing when we look at people, even just as an individual. When you look at the moments in your life where you had the biggest personal growth, it usually comes after something that was very tragic, very difficult, very hard. Because it, you know, in my own, you know, kind of way of thinking, it's the universe shaking us saying, you got too comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, you were becoming frozen, you were becoming stagnant. I'm trying to wake you up. And it's kind of like this ice bath of reality of what was I thinking, you know, during this time. And I think you're exactly right with the country, you know, right now. One of the things that we used to teach about, you know, when we talk about diversity, people automatically assume, okay, diversity means different, right? But what we don't often talk about is different often connotates itself with there could be conflict. Different means uncomfortable. Different means fear. Different means that I have to get out of my comfort zone. And most of us try to avoid all of those things. We want to avoid being uncomfortable. We want to not be afraid. We don't want to risk things. And we certainly want to kind of avoid conflict. And so we're happy keeping, you know, the pace. Um, but here's the thing, and this is what we teach, you know, in the business world, but it applies to everything. Studies show that yes, if you have a homogenous team, and it can apply to a community or society, if you have a homogenous team where everybody believes the same things, where everybody, communicates the same way, if everybody, does the same thing over and over, it can be successful, right? It'll be stable because there's no conflict. The problem is it will also be stagnant. It will be frozen. There will not be innovation. There will not be growth. You will not learn from your mistakes because you'll continue to do the same thing over and over and over again. But here's the really interesting part is, diverse teams, yes, they can be wildly successful. They can also be wildly unsuccessful and fail. And the only difference between those two is, do you have a leader that knows how to navigate and work with diversity? And I don't mean control it. It means being able to respect different voices, know how to elevate different ideas. And that is when diverse teams soar way above and succeed way beyond, homogenous teams. And that is, I think, where we are as a country is we have not learned how to navigate our diversity. It is a fact. We are a diverse country. That is not going to go anywhere. And so until we can learn to navigate that and use that diversity to our benefit, recognizing how to respect different ideas, elevate different voices, and embed them into our communities and overall way of thinking, that is when we're really going to rise. And so right now, what we're feeling is we are feeling half of our country is trying to make us rise and half of our country is trying to keep us stagnant because it feels safe. It feels comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that when it comes to people's fear of what is different, that creates this mindset that if it's different, it's bad. If someone is different and they start to win, that means I will lose. And that mindset just doesn't help anyone grow. And it eventually will sabotage everyone. Like, we're all on the same ship. This country will not like split in half and we get to choose a side. If we sink the ship because we can't get along or understand differences, we're all going down on it. And I think that that's something a lot of people aren't aware of. I think we're seeing a lot of people finally get the taste of it and realize, like, hey, like you try to sink our ship, you're on the same ship. Like, we're all going down together. So we might as well take a look and say, hey, what strengths do we all have as individuals, and how can we make those things stand out and create something better in the future? And yeah, I've tried to have conversations with people because the division is not happening on one side. Both sides are pulling away from one another. And unfortunately, that's not the solution to the problem. And it's about creating that unity and removing the fear of different or other, because that's never going to create a harmony or a space where people can live and even choose comfort if they want to.
Yeah, I want to play on that for a minute, if you don't mind. I'm going to
Yeah.
take us on a little tangent here. So what you described, right, accurately, is one, the scarcity mindset, which I think is, the big pain of any society. And, that is the belief that if somebody has more, that means less for me. And particularly where we see that is, this pushback on diversity, where there is, by the way, I just want to, say this as somebody that was in the field for 20 plus years, there's a huge misunderstanding of what diversity work actually is. And not just on one side or the other. People who are even, pro, diversity, equity, and inclusion have a misunderstanding of actually how it currently operates. And so sometimes how they are supporting it or arguing for it can also be a little bit harmful. So just to give you one example really quick. So we hear a lot about diversity hires. So talking about fear, talking about scarcity, talking about a time where people are already afraid of losing their jobs from technology, they're afraid of everything else. they are blaming diversity of, unqualified individuals being placed into roles that they're not qualified for, and that companies have policies in place that we are forcing that to happen. Okay, number one, here's the misunderstanding. There is no company, not one single company that has a policy that says hire this Black person and force them into this role, hire this gay person and force them into that role. There is not a policy out there. Here is where the confusion happens. One, there are companies that do have goals, absolutely. Like you saw after Black Lives Matter, a lot of companies say, I want to double Black leadership. Okay, and they're talking about, when they say Black leadership, senior executive, leadership. So to begin with, you have maybe 3 people in a large company that are Black within that leadership. So when they say double, they're saying our goal is to have six out of 500 people, which is the base minimum to begin with. But
Yeah.
second, where they think the quotas are not with who gets the role. The quotas that have been in place by some company are, you have to have at least one Black person, one female, one diverse candidate on your slate of candidates that are being interviewed. That's it. That's all. And again, this is a base minimum, right? And so you may have 10 candidates for a role, and all requiring is that you have one candidate. It does not guarantee the job. And guess what? 90% of the time, because when you're talking senior and executive levels, it is hired by a group of people. It is not hired by one single manager. The diverse candidate still misses out. They still do not get hired, even though we've made sure that they are part of the interview candidates. That is what is happening, right? And so this notion, it is easier to be angry and say, these are the people that are taking our jobs, as opposed to looking at the system itself, which is broken.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I've climbed several corporate ladders in some of the Fortune 500 companies. And as I climbed, you realize diversity disappears. And one of the things that I've gone to so many different conferences and trainings to be considered someone who follows in diversity inclusion spaces. And when I climbed the ladder within my companies, that was one of the things that I personally saw. Like you could have the diverse candidate sitting right in front of you, but they don't realize that this diversity and inclusion stuff does not say you have to hire them. And what I saw when I was sitting with a panel of people who were interested in hiring was, they don't really vibe with us. Why? Well, they're just too loud, or she says this, or he was a little bit more,
Right.
like it's a boys club up here, and there are so many things that are in place just to get you a seat in front of them to try to convince them to hire you. And in lots of those instances, when I realized, hey, I've been lucky enough to be put in a position of power to open a door for diversity, I made sure that I kicked the door down, removed the hinges so it would be as hard as possible for them to try to shut it again. And I was purposely going out there, finding qualified candidates and bulldozing over the people who were trying to block. But that was me having the diversity inclusion understanding, knowing that a diverse leadership panel was good for the company I worked for, whether they could see it or not at the beginning. Because even during Black Lives Matter, my company sent out an email, and you could tell it was not written by a diverse group of people because it was very offensive the way it was written. It very much spoke to the property being damaged at certain protests that happened instead of the company's employees that were experiencing an emotional distress because of what's going on in the world. And I was like, that was very tone deaf and very privileged position to come from as a company. And when I was given the opportunity to speak, I was like, how about I let my Black trans friend, she does not work for this company, but she is a lot more educated in the realm of all of this than I am personally. She does this for a living. how about you hire her to speak and just let someone who actually understands it to the depths that it needs to be understood for this conversation to be had. And thankfully, they allowed me to do that. And but it required a lot of me saying, no, 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 like, stop trying to put it on my shoulders. I've got one little tick there of, yeah, I'm a part of the queer community, but I'm still a white male. And so when it comes to that, I know, especially on my journey, that my privilege is blinding to me.
Yeah.
I had to learn how to hear a reality that did not fit mine because of my privilege, and I had to learn to listen and accept that reality as truth, because their reality, sitting right beside each other at the same office, still completely different realities of how we got there, what voice we're allowed to use in separate spaces, because I might get away with something that they would not, because
Mhm.
I don't have that tone, or I'm not loud. Like, I can be the same loud or use the same tone, but it's looked at in a different way. It's given, oh, he's got great leadership. He's got this. So it's definitely a journey, and hearing all the ignorance coming out, I'm like, you're being played, you're being confused. And I've had a lot of women reach out to me because they know that diversity and inclusion is something I've participated in, and they've lost their women's conferences, they've lost their budgets for, and they're like, I don't know what happened. And I'm like, you voted for Trump. Like, you let someone in that doesn't understand, and you didn't understand that you are considered a diversity person too. uh, but it's definitely a journey for people right now, and unfortunately, I think a lot of people are getting rude awakenings, while the rest of us that have been understanding this on a deeper level are kind of sitting here like, yeah, that's what we've been screaming. Like, that's what we said, and you see it's playing out now, but now it's affecting people that didn't think they would be affected by it at all.
Yeah, and I think we have to get over fear of words, right? And just kind of embrace the inherent nature that there is a fear of the word privilege. Because when we think privilege, we think, okay, entitlement, and I'm not entitled, I'm not spoiled. I've got news for you. You know, privilege is, it's literally an advantage, right?
Hmm.
And that it was, you know, given to us, it doesn't mean that, you know, we went out of our way to grab that advantage. Sometimes you're just born with it based on the color of your skin, your gender, regardless, right? But here's the
Yeah.
thing, every single individual has a privilege, whether they're aware of it or not. Every single person has a privilege, just like every single person has a bias, right? Which is also not a bad word. It just means, you know, that we have an affinity for something versus something else. But the problem with the use of the word privilege, outside of us thinking, okay, this means entitlement, this thing's, you know, spoiled. There was a lot of videos going around a few years ago. You've probably seen some of them, called like a privilege walk. And it was a very effective kind of training tool. One of my favorites was kind of in a park where you had several college students, different races, different genders, different orientations, all like at the beginning line. And the, you know, guy that was leading and facilitating said, all right, I'm going to have each of you take a step forward. And at the end of this, wherever you land, we're going to race to like this bucket of cash or something like that. I forget. So if you, it's affirmative, you step forward. So he asked a bunch of questions, and it can be anything from, you know, I was raised in a household with two parents. I was raised in a house that had books available to me. I never had to worry about where my meal came from. You know, whatever. So then everybody takes a step forward, and he pauses. And he's like, all right, I want everybody to look around and see where you are now. Now, the furthest up were a lot of our straight white males, right? Not far behind, straight white females, not far behind, gay white males, you know, and further on back, you had some black individuals that didn't even take one step forward, not even one step forward, and we're still on that starting line. And, you know, the facilitator made a point, and he was like, I want you to know something. Where you are starting off right now to race towards that bucket of cash, Where you are starting off right has nothing to do with anything that you did for yourself. Nothing. It was just you were born into the right family, born into the right parents, born into the right environment. Had nothing to do with how hard you worked, had nothing to do with how smart you are, nothing to do with how attractive you are. And where you are starting this race, the people that haven't even taken one step forward are going to have to race twice as hard, run twice as fast, and be twice as strong. And let me tell you, some of those folks still were able to catch up and almost win the race, having to do that much work to get there. So when we talk about diversity, it is all we're trying to do is make sure that we're all at the same starting point. You know, it is recognizing that some of us have access to things that other people don't. So how do we provide, you know, more equitable access to education? How do we provide more equitable access to, you know, interviews? You know, that is the problem that we are trying to solve. It is not taking the person on the front line and putting them in front. It is, I'm just placing them beside you. And if you're afraid that they're going to win because they're beside you, that's a you thing. That's a that's you're not doing the work and have taken for granted where you are. If they beat you, that's on you. And that is what we have to get comfortable, you know, and having the right conversation around. I know we've up on this little rant. You hit my like.
No, I love it. And I've seen that video so many different times and shared in so many different spaces. And I've sadly, like, it still doesn't land with some people. My cousin married someone that I had a very strong conversation with about that, because he could not understand that his family owning a business that has been passed down, and him being in his early 20s and already being VP of the company, meant that he was living a life of privilege. And he got caught up in exactly what you were saying. I worked hard. And I'm like, I'm not saying you don't work hard. I'm saying that the people who their parents work for 5 different companies to make ends meet and don't have anything to pass down to their children, that's your competition starting way behind you in that line, where you've got a company already that belongs to you when your dad retires. Like, that is a dream that some people don't have the opportunity to even think. They're like, okay, I need to get 3 jobs to help my mom afford rent. That's a very different starting point there.
Right.
And I'm not saying that you having privilege makes you a bad person. I'm just saying, be aware when you're voting and when you are saying things, that you're not calling certain people lazy. You're not voting against rights, or voting for a candidate that's getting rid of someone's rights that have no impact on you if it sways the other way. Like, it's hard to have conversations with people. And I've told many people, and I've had friends with some of my straight guy friends, where I'm like, how did you get to this point of understanding me and your wife and other people of diverse, where you're the most privileged in this space? What made you open your mind to the fact that others weren't as lucky and privileged at birth like you were? Because that does seem to be like, I will grab someone and I'm like, try to get them to understand. I'm like, imagine that you were overweight. Imagine you were like just trying to find something that they could possibly understand. And it's just like in one ear and out the other. And I'm like asking my guy friends, I'm like, what created that understanding for you? And they're like, well, my parents always made me aware of it. Like, my teachers were diverse. I grew up in a city. I had this, like, it was just access to knowledge at a young age made them more aware. So like when I'm seeing education being messed with right now, where they're diluting or whatever they're doing to the education departments, I'm just like, oh no, like, we're not moving in the right direction here. Like, we need to be educating people. I personally had lots of experience where I had diverse people around me most of my life. And there were still, as I grew up and connected with more people and moved around, there were still times when I messed up where I thought I was saying something right and I was not. I got it wrong. And I had to admit that I'm sorry, I messed up. Thank you for teaching me, or thank you for making this a teaching moment for me. I will do better next time. But like, that also required me to be okay with saying, I'm wrong. Like, I'm sorry, I messed up, which is really hard for people. And the more I've dove into this, it's like people have created identities where admitting they're wrong means they're nothing. They're horrible people. And I'm like, no, like you're a person. None of us will be right 100% of the time, and it's just like a journey that people have to go on. But I've found access to education on it is the biggest thing, and that's why I say I would love if like high school students had to go to another school for a semester in another state, and then college required you to go to another country to do a semester. Because once you exist in other places and realize the way you live life is just one of many, it makes you see the world as this diverse, beautiful place that functions with us all being different, instead of assuming this is how I do it, this is how you're supposed to do it, you're wrong if you're not doing it this way mentality that a lot of people have that don't get the opportunity to access education or diversity. Because even in the cities, I've told people, if someone bumped into me or dumped their coffee on me and called me a like faggot, um, the likelihood of people around defending me is high. If someone did that to me in my rural neighborhood that I grew up in as a kid, it would be more like them joining in to be the bullies of me being the queer person. And there's definitely a difference. And I moved back to the rural part of the world after living in cities, and I couldn't put my finger on it for a while. And then I realized like there is quite a difference of living in a space where diversity is understood and diversity is just there if someone happened to be different, but they're kind of viewed different as well. And it definitely opened my eyes a lot to just how people's minds don't develop that empathy for people who are different if they're not exposed to that diversity or education.
Yeah, and I think you again hit the nail on the head. You know, exposure and experience is a really important thing. You know, even two of us talking here, we are two gay white males, right? And so we have some very big privileges attached to us being white and being male. Doesn't matter our background, doesn't matter, you know, economic wise, whatever else. We have to own that just being white and male, it's a huge privilege and advantage. I am one of the few for 20 plus years to exist as a white gay male in the D&I space to be at the level that I was. Most of my peers were not white in that space. And I was very fortunate that most of my mentors and most of my bosses, with the exception of one, were Black women or women of color. And when I first got into the diversity space, they said, all right, for the first year, you're not touching any of the gay stuff. You're not touching the LGBT community. You're not touching pride. You're not touching any of that because you already have experience with it. And I know that's why you joined. And I know, and she's like, and I'm not saying you're not going to be able to, but she's like, I need you to embed yourself in different communities. So she sent me to the National African American Insurance Association conference in Atlanta. And I had grown up in Stone Mountain and I had grown up in a, you know, everything. But so she sent me to this conference and I was the only white person at this conference. Now, I have been an only in a room being an only gay, but I could be invisible. I didn't have to admit it. I could hide, I could be quiet. I didn't have to say it out loud. It was the first time that it was visibly recognizable that I was an only in a room. And that was a whole different experience to really understand and to really feel what it must be like to be identified right away because of the color of your skin or your ability or your gender, it's very different than something that we can hide, right? And lucky, I gained a mentor in that experience. Her name is Margaret Red. She happens to be the mother of Chris Red, the Saturday Night Live star. And I didn't know it at the time when we actually met and became friends. And this came, years later. But she became a very close friend and a mentor. But she has given me the best advice in my career because, I confessed to her. I said, "Look, I'm feeling really nervous being a white guy in this environment. I really want to do well. Is there anything that you can kind of give me advice on?" And she said, first of all, she was like, there are places that you need to own your voice and own your whiteness because it is a boys club at the top, like you said. There are going to be rooms that you have access to that some of your peers don't. Right or wrong, you have access to them. And in those rooms, when you find yourself in there and there isn't other diversity, you're going to have to meet their whiteness and you're going to have to call them out on their whiteness. And you're going to have to be louder and you can speak to an experience that they can understand. And call out your own ignorance, call out your own, everything else. And she was right. But then she followed up and she's like, and then there are rooms, even if you are the leader in that room, that you need to back down and you need to provide the platform for others to speak. And I never, ever forgot that advice because, that was my number one goal. In becoming a diversity leader is that if I am in the room with other women or if I'm in the room with Black employees, my goal is not to speak for them. My goal is to make sure that they feel brave enough, that they feel comfortable enough, that is a safe space for them, and create that platform for them to show their work, for them to share their voice. That is my job as a diversity leader and bringing them up and opening that door for them. And that is when I got to shut my mouth. But in other spaces, I've got to use that privilege to talk to other privileged people. And it was great advice. And it's something that I live by this day.
I I love that because that's almost like we had someone that gave us the exact same advice. I was given the same advice by someone that I shared something where I felt that I was taking up too much room. I was like, I feel like I'm a bad person because I'm taking up so much room. And she told me, she was like, don't you ever say that. She was like, I want you to realize that we need strong allies. We don't need weak ones. And we do not need you taking up less space because someone like you will take up the space and open the door to give someone the right to speak in a room they weren't allowed to before. And we need you to educate yourself about our struggles so that in a room where the door is locked to us, that we are represented through your voice and what you have to say. And at that moment, it made me realize, like, yeah, I can't play small. Like, I am going to be that person that when I show up, I will make sure that people are aware this leadership group is too white. This leadership group has too many men on it. This leadership group does not have diversity. And I think that that's important. And that's why I lift voices like yours up and why I connect with other people, because I think it is important for us to realize, like, even as an author, you are doing something by creating something that takes up a little bit of space on this planet that gives an LGBT kid, a black kid, something that they can connect to and read and say, I'm represented here in this small pages. I'm represented here, and I think that that's all that we can do is continue to open doors and hold space, and weakening ourselves is not a choice. I keep telling people, like, all this craziness that's happening in the world, like, is not making me feel small at all. It is making me feel like I'm about to have to be a nuclear bomb and explode and educate people to a mass level of understanding. And it's definitely scary. Uh, I have definitely seen firsthand jobs like my boyfriend, he is fearful that with every job that's being cut with the federal government because he works at a federal hospital, that's terrifying. And we've had the thought of what would we do if that happened to us? What's the next step? But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to allow this chaos that's being created make me lose sight of this does matter. This is important, whether it's protecting the LGBT community or any other diverse group of people. But every little thing counts. And I tell people this all the time. If you're an author, write a book. Like, if you are a speaker, go out and find a stage to speak on or an audience to listen to your voice. Like, if you're an artist, go out and paint art that changes the world for the better. Like, we all have special gifts and abilities to do certain things. Some people can't get on a live and have a conversation like this. We
Right.
are capable of that. So we're doing it. And don't rely on other people. Like, don't say, oh, well, someone else already wrote a book. There's not enough books like this out there yet. Like, there needs to be more queer characters. There needs to be more stories where we're normalized and there's magic and things that we can just connect with and our hearts just connect with it and just have a little bit of peace to like connect to so that we can go out into the world and deal with the hard stuff. And I think that too often people go, oh, well, no one listens to me. I'm like, everyone listens. Like, you walking past someone and smiling or correcting someone when they do something wrong, those types of things, all of it has a ripple effect. Don't ever think you're too small to make a difference, because even like making a child smile when you've got the opportunity, giving someone extra money if they need it, like all those small little things impact. And I think too often we look at president as this change maker. We look at influencer, author, these people with titles as the only people capable of shifting us in the right direction. And then we sit in our hopelessness when we don't see that movement happening fast enough. But if we all realized we have quite the bit of power to make changes, whether it's knocking on your neighbor's door and saying something nice or cooking something and just knocking on people's doors and giving it out. There's just so many ways we can do things to connect. I helped a neighbor who was older shovel his driveway once and found out that he was very homophobic. We had a conversation and I enlightened him because he kept saying, oh, what are those faggots doing inside? They can't come out and help. And I'm like, actually, I'm gay, my roommates are straight, and I'm out here shoveling. So I would like to have this conversation now about
Yeah.
whatever stereotype you placed on us as being a worthless group of guys. Like, I'm the one here. And I developed a relationship with him. It was awkward at first. I could have just been like, throw the shovel down and be like, F you,
Right.
after he made that statement. But I was like, okay, this could be a teaching moment. I'm not in danger. He's my neighbor. Uh, but all of those types of things do add up. And it does kind of create, even if you just do it for your local community, don't think you have to change the world. I've had to let go of the idea that I can dramatically impact what's going on in other parts of the world because it just was a weight that I couldn't bear. But when I was like, you know what, I can educate people here. I can educate my friends that care about me because I'm a person to them. I'm not some random gay on the internet screaming at them. But having those conversations and educating myself more so I can understand what roles I can play to push things in the direction I think would be a better direction.
Right.
But all of that matters.
It does. And, you know, for me, it goes back to the power of stories, even back to the book, everything that we're talking about, the way that we need to share more stories and stories that represent all of us, because that was the number one tool that we used in diversity, equity, and inclusion, was telling the stories of others, because it allows us, as you said, to be not only educated, but there is an emotional connection. It allows us to reach a very human level. There was a TV show not long ago called Sense8, one of my favorite shows that ever came out that was on Netflix. And one about it had a different, all got to put themselves in each other's, shoes, lives. They were all from different parts of the world, spoke different languages, different genders, orientation. And there was a scene that I will never forget where one of the gay men who happened to be Hispanic, happened to be like this actor and everything, and came home, and there was a vulgar slang that was written on his house, painted on. And in that moment, each of them were able to see through his eyes, whether it was you as a woman, you as a Black person, different slang that represented them, that had been called out to them. And it was such a powerful scene because every single person could feel of, I've been here. I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be minimized. And, when you're talking about having more media, whether it's, art or literature or TV shows, representation is not only important in just visual aspect, but in neurodiversity and breaking through the stereotypes that currently exist. And this kind of circles back to like where we kind of started of when I wrote this book, I wanted to be very careful that I didn't fall into some of the stereotypes that exist out there for our community. And look, some of those stereotypes are a part of our culture, and I'm proud of it and I love it, but those stories have been told. I wanted these characters to be front and center. I didn't want them to be the laugh track. I didn't want them to be a side character that felt performative or a checklist. And for those that think that, okay, well, yeah, I'm seeing more on TV and I'm seeing more of this and everything else, it was only 2 years ago where we had a national debate over having a Black Little Mermaid. We were having debates over having Black elves in, this Lord of the Rings television show. People are still upset about embedding characters in a universe that represent something different than the heteronormative white cis experience.
Yeah.
And part of that is, yes, because of what we've been exposed to in our past, and we create all these little biases in our head, and that's a whole conversation, when we're running out of time on. But the other piece is, it's just because we want to see ourselves, and so all of a sudden we're not seeing ourselves. We're seeing somebody different. But the more that we hear different stories, the more that we read different narratives, the more comfortable we can become that there are many more identities. In this book, one of the things I wanted to pull out is like gay men can have fellowship with straight men and it not be sexualized. We can have a love story where a gay man is still considered a warrior, that is still considered a badass, that can still like go out there and create all of the same feelings, the same action that any straight man can do. But I can also not create your typical stoic, hero, and actually say that a man can have emotions. A man can feel insecurities. And those are things that are really important for us to start embedding, even just for boys and for men, that we have to break down those stereotypes. So yeah, that's what I had hoped to accomplish, when I wrote this book. You've seen the dedication for those who have kind of joined, my dedication starts off, my book was written for everybody that has not seen themselves, in a fairy tale, especially at the forefront of that. And we need more stories like that. That's why I wrote this book.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to all that comes in the future, in the future books that you write, as well as I want to say thank you for the content you create on your platforms as well, because it is a scary thought when you think about publishing a book, and you being so open about your journey and the things that you've learned have made me feel like, okay, so maybe there is an avenue forward for me to publish something, because you hear a lot of the fears of people and some of the stuff that happens where an author ends up owing hundreds of thousands of dollars to a big publishing company because it didn't do as well as they expected. And you hear all these horror stories and it terrifies you away from telling the story that could be told. And just kind of hearing you saying like, hey, I learned this and I did this, and I made mistakes and I learned from it, I'm telling you guys this so you don't make this mistake. I think that's a beautiful thing to do. And I think that in today's world, with access to TikTok, to Instagram, and spaces where you can do that, instead of coming out as like, hey, I did it, I made a book, read the book, and be selling the book. Like, you're like, hey, I did an amazing thing, I've got so many things, but I also want to share with you all who might also have a story to tell. And like I said, there needs to be more stories out there. And hearing and connecting more with authors like you that are willing to say like, I learned something here. This didn't work so well for me, not sure what it might do for other people, but I appreciate you for being vulnerable in that way too, because that's a journey, and there are a lot of voices that don't get heard that probably would be that representation of someone else's story in a book. But also just the magic that you put into your book, like I think it's very easy for people to connect with, and I think people who read fiction in general will absolutely love it. There are so many unique spins. My partner makes fun of me because I don't go for like trilogies and stuff. I always try to find new books, new things that tell new stories. He's very dragon. We make a joke that if it has the word dragon, blood, fire, bone, like, it's his book. And I'm always seeking new, something that doesn't sound like just a retelling with different names. And when I read through your book, I was like, I haven't found one like this before. And it was beautifully done. And I'm sad that I found it right as it came out, because that means I have to probably wait for quite a while for the next one to come out. But I will find other books to read until then, and I will definitely stay connected to you because I'm excited to see where your characters go, and just knowing someone with as beautiful of a heart as you are writing it, just know that that's just as important when it comes to the characters in the world you're creating.
Thank you. Thank you. I will say, I'm already working on book 2. It's going to come out early 20, and I'm hoping to have actually book 2 and 3 come out very short within each other. And for everybody kind of that joined us, I just want to do a shout out again, not just for me and my book, The Storyteller from Valencia, but like when you're hearting and you're engaging and you're supporting, which I feel a lot of that love, whether it's on this live stream or, through other social media, you still got to go out and take the extra step, when it's wonderful. And this applies to not just diversity, but it applies to like all independent businesses and marginally owned artists, creators. It's one thing to shout out and show love, but then we've got to take the next step and actually do it. Like, if we want to see more queer stories, then you're not going to find it necessarily in all the mainstream. You're going to have the same 5 or 6. You're going to have to go out and support indie authors, because there's some amazing indie authors that are queer. Same thing with the Black community. Same thing with, you've got to go out and invest and elevate, just like you look for Black-owned businesses or queer-owned businesses. You've got to go out sometimes and look for these folks and buy their books, and that's what gets them noticed. And then they can bring others up with them and open those doors. So I appreciate you giving me a platform today and allowing me to speak about it. And I've enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I definitely look forward to future conversations with you. I feel like we could probably talk for hours about so many different things. So I just want anyone who's watching, like, I know that you've got several different ways of purchasing the book, but what would you tell people would be the best route? I know that you've got a way to get the hardback a little bit cheaper than other platforms.
So, you can get the dust jacketed hardcover version through the link on my Insta profile. It's also on my website, swkentbooks.com. It's $10 cheaper than if you go through a retailer for the hardcover. But it's available Kindle Unlimited. It's available in all editions. You can get it from Barnes and Nobles, Walmart, anything online at the moment. Yeah, and look for the Easter holiday week. I'm going to be doing some deals during the time period as well. But yeah, please go out and get the book. And thank you for being such a so.
Yeah, and I know that you made a TikTok about like this journey of creating it and turning it into like an Audible type of book. That is also something that I think is beautiful. I am more of a fiction person that dives into like the physical copy. I'm actually donating this one to our local library, and I've got a hardcover coming for myself. But I'm donating that one to a local library just so people have access to it here in the city. But I just love everything that you've shared, and I will definitely probably read this multiple times before the next one comes out. And if it does make it to like the Audible thing, I think that that is another beautiful space for your book to exist. But like you said, there's stuff you learn on that journey as well. It's not as simple as just like, hey, it's an Audible, but I'm excited for that if that happens as
Me
well.
too. Me too. Me too. Thank you, John. And it's hard for me on live still. I'm still getting used to lives and seeing comments. And so
Yeah,
I'm sorry if we have questions, but I appreciate you being here and listening.
yeah.
So
Awesome. Well, you have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you soon.
thank you. Thank you, Drummond. Take care.
Yep. Bye.